Hey guys, what's going on? So of late, I've kind of noticed that there have been a couple people actually mention that they are new players to the game. So I kind of got the idea that maybe we could take a look at the standard 5-star weapons and maybe put together a list of, what weapons I think are most useful to put on the 50/50 on the weapon banners, especially because we have a couple new weapons that have been added to the standard banners since the launch of the game. And with new players, obviously come people trying to figure this stuff out, as we all did when we first started playing. So I thought maybe this would be something useful, something a little bit different. We don't have a ton going on in the game right now at the moment, so hopefully you find some value in this. So to start it off, I kind of want to take a look at 4 weapons that I think are going to be generally the most useful for most people, because the characters that they are for are 4-star characters, which means I think there's a higher likelihood that people either will have them or already do have them, and will also continue to be useful for time to come, so it doesn't feel like you're wasting a weapon, loss on a character who's not really going to be all that useful. A weapon that I generally think is quite good, but I think for some people, especially if you've been playing since where Wind was introduced and we got a free copy of Wind and we had that event, you may already have Wind's special event 4-star. Morgana had one kind of early in the game's life cycle for all those of us who've been playing since the beginning. And these kind of event 4-stars typically end up being, like, in my opinion, they end up being like 4.5-star weapons. But of course, getting into what Kunoichi actually does, Kunoichi increases speed by 15%, which Wind really cares about because her S3, her skill 3, damage increase is speed based, and additionally her A6 turn cooldown is based on her speed hitting a 160 breakpoint. So this already kind of puts you 15 speed points closer to that breakpoint just by having it equipped. And then for every 2 insight stacks broken, additionally gain 2 intel stacks, and additionally increase all allies damage dealt by 6% for 1 turn, which helps Wind do what she kind of does at an expedited pace, with the benefit of the additional damage up. For 4-star weapons are certainly like suitable backups. Every one of these characters, fully forged 4-stars, are totally suitable. You don't need to do this. But obviously, if you're pulling on the weapon banner, you're going to put weapons on the 50/50, so there's a chance you're going to get these. But in general, over the 4-star, the event 4-star specifically, you're just getting more speed, and you're kind of getting more targeted buffing to damage instead of the event 4-star kind of as a random attack, defense, or HP buff. But if you have Wind and you're going to be pulling for a weapon, I think this is a perfectly viable option to add as a 50/50 chance. And then next up on the list is a weapon that I really like, and I actually think it does a lot to improve the usefulness of Soy as a unit. It increases his max HP by 30% when activating Desperado's healing effect, which his kit is pretty intertwined with Desperado kind of in general. There's a 52% chance to grant the same effect to the ally with the lowest remaining HP, which gives Soy a chance to heal your lowest health unit pretty frequently, and he will do it passively, which is great. So I think this is a hugely useful sustain effect, and it makes Soy way more viable as like a soul sustainer unit on a team than he would be if his heals from Desperado were solely locked to just him, which they are without this weapon. Add on to that when Soy gets attacked, he's passively decreasing the attacker's defense by 30%, and you've got yourself a pretty good weapon here, I think. He's just getting a ton of passive value from this weapon, and I actually think purely on the weapon alone, this is like a pretty top-tier standard 5-star weapon in my opinion. It just helps him do so much that makes him way more useful for his team and enables him to become more of like a viable sustainer for his team than I think he would be otherwise. And add on to the fact that Soy's already kind of like de facto a sustainer slash debuffer with how much defense threat he's providing. I think his 5-star weapon really just helps improve on his kit. All right, and next up on this list is another weapon that is newer to the standard 5-star pool, along with Winds that we didn't have these weapons in the pool at the beginning of the game, obviously because Vino and Wind were not in the game yet. It is going to be Vino's Jolting Pulse. And if you have Queen, I think that this is going to be a weapon that you're really going to maybe want to prioritize. That's kind of why I have it in the top 2, is because Vino is kind of the best kind of sidekick to Queen. This weapon increases her ailment accuracy by 36%, which is a stat that Vino scales off of. After inflicting an ailment on a foe, which she's basically doing constantly anyway, she's decreasing a target's defense by 33% for 2 turns, so a pretty big defense shred. And this is going to be almost permanent because she's inflicting ailments every other turn, and it's a 2-turn debuff. They're going to have just a permanent 33% defense down almost the entire fight, which is great and useful for anybody. That's not just a Queen effect. That's a useful effect for any team. And it also grants her an 80% chance every 2 turns to randomly apply an ailment to a foe, which is a super useful bonus, especially when Queen is like doing a lot of damage based on these ailments. It's always good to just have another source of applying ailments, and this is just like a passive chance to add it, 80%, which is really good. While the 4-star does provide a potential 36% defense down, inflicting ailments and radiation specifically, 18% for each of those combined, 36. I still think just the 5-star has a wider range of value, especially to the teams that she's going to be playing on. And then last but not least is going to be Final Buster, which is probably the best standard 5-star weapon, at least for the 4-star characters that we have, in my opinion. And part of that is just because of how good Leon is. Like, Leon is really just such a useful unit. So Final Buster is increasing attack by 30%, which helps Leon because Leon's buffs kind of scale on his attack. So 30% is pretty nice. And then after using a skill on an ally, you get one of the following buffs granted on them. The first is increased attack 16% for 1 turn. The other increased crit damage 16% for 1 turn. But if the target has 2 or more Power of Friendship stacks, which you're going to be trying to maintain on your main DPS anyways, since Power of Friendship is like a buff in and of itself, right? You will grant both buffs and increase granted shields by 10% for 1 turn. So kind of at max efficiency with this weapon at 2 Power of Friendship stacks, you're getting the 480 flat attack up from the Power of Friendship. And then with this weapon, you're getting an additional 16% attack up on the target and 16% crit damage up, which just makes an already good character even better. I think this weapon just kind of takes Leon into like the stratosphere of kind of an irreplaceable buffer on a lot of teams. So those are kind of the weapons I wanted to highlight here. I think now what I'm going to do is actually just like, I'm going to go one by one and like really quickly say, here's the situation that if you find yourself in this situation, maybe you consider putting this weapon on here, or maybe just skip this until you have all the other weapons. We can go ahead and start with Key's Baptism of Fire weapon. Inherently, the issue is not with this weapon. The issue is with Key. Key is really only useful on one team right now, and that's the On team. And I think even then he's going to kind of get pushed out once we have characters like Howler in the game at some point. And so as much as I like Key, it's hard to kind of recommend using this over anything that I've covered so far. As for Yuki's Karmic Cycle, I do think Yuki's Karmic Cycle is quite good. It's like a huge defense increase, which she's scaling off of. It gives additional buffing to defense, kind of playing off of her kit really nicely. But again, if you don't have Fox, then Yuki gets no play on any other team ever, basically, outside of like maybe you use her in, Trial of Thorns or one of these kind of random boss fights like we have going on for Kaba's event right now. Ryuji's Revenge Axe is one that I would consider putting on here, especially if maybe, you've pulled Ryuji, but you didn't get his weapon from like the Lufel plan or whatever. I think this is one you could consider. It just gives him a lot of damage up, right? Ryuji doesn't hit often, but he hits hard. That's kind of his kit. That's all he does. And this weapon just helps him hit even harder. So I think this is one you could consider. Morgana's a little bit in the same boat as Wind was, where he has an event 4-star, which kind of pushes this weapon down a little bit, in my opinion, because the 4-star has kind of always been good enough for me. And if you're pulling somewhat frequently, all the other kind of 5-star healers just do more than Morgana does for the most part. But if you do have Morgana, I don't think this is like a terrible option. Again, I think there are other 5-star weapons that are probably more useful than this one. But if Morgana's like your only sustain unit at the moment, then maybe this is one you kind of throw on to consider. Maybe On, again, similar situation. This one's like similar to Ryuji's in the sense that it's not really changing her kit at all, but it is helping her do what she does, which is On wants fire teams, she wants people inflicting burn, and she wants to do lots of damage to people who are burning, right? And that's kind of what this weapon helps her do. So it's nothing crazy, but again, if On is going to be one of your kind of main damage dealers and you're not pulling on every single banner or whatever, especially if you're not planning on pulling, CNY Rin, On is going to be your fire DPS until, the P3 collab starts pretty much. And I think this weapon is like totally viable. Rin can really kind of slot into everything, and she's quite good on teams like not just cursed teams, because she applies so much damage up, and this 5-star weapon helps her do that with these Waters of Oblivion stacks. Unfortunately, I'm just going to kind of skip Riddle, Lufel, Closer, because I just don't. If you get all the other 5-stars on Lost 50/50s and you just kind of want each one, then go for it. But otherwise, I don't think these are like super necessary or mandatory, because these characters just aren't all that useful. Like Moko is in the same situation. Okeon, I think this weapon becomes a little bit more viable of a pick if you are not pulling for Futaba and or Phoebe, because then for the most part, Okeon is going to be your B-side navigator for the foreseeable future. And I think this is like a fine weapon. It just helps Okeon provide more buffs. Fleuret, I think this weapon is actually like quite useful for Fleuret. He's the only wind DPS in the game at the moment, and he kind of will be for outside of like Mont Figure Skater. I don't know if there is another wind DPS in the game, even like on the other servers. So I think this is one you could certainly consider, like if you really like Fleuret and you want that kind of type coverage. This is certainly one that I wouldn't be like upset if I ended up getting it. Sumi, I just have never really found like much of a use for Sumi. He's really good for like kind of the Trial of Thorns style content. I know there's people who really like him. I love Dot characters, so I really kind of wish I had more use for him, but this is a good weapon for him if you really like him. Again, Puppet's like very similar to Okeon. If you're not pulling any other navigators, I think this weapon does provide, a little bit of usefulness for Puppet, but also I have Puppet's 4-star weapon, and that's what I use, and I've never really had a complaint with it. Yeah, hopefully if you were at all confused maybe on any of these weapons, or it's just been a while since you sat down and kind of looked at all these weapons and thought, okay, what am I going to do next? If you're not pulling every banner, like many patches could go by until you lose a 50/50 again if you're not pulling all the time. So hopefully this was a nice refresher for you. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If there's anything else kind of similar to this kind of content that you'd like to see, let me know in the comments. I need ideas. So yeah, I appreciate you guys watching. I will see you on the next one, and have a good one.